2 decades after the original TV show, 4 of the most talented directors of the 1980s came together to reimagine the Twilight Zone for the big screen. One of us has seen the classic series and the other has not. So let's see how it works for both kinds of audience. Welcome everyone to the Atomic Cinema Experiment. I am Peter, and joining me as always is David.
I come in peace.
This is a science fiction movie podcast, and on this episode we are heading down a road somewhere beyond the normal realm into the Twilight Zone.
I get it now. Oh, okay.
Very good, yes. So we're doing Twilight Zone, the movie, here on this episode. Obviously, we'll give some more details in a little bit. We'll start spoiler-free, although I suspect because it's an anthology, and we've had this issue on Streams After Midnight before, and that doing a spoiler-free section for an anthology is kind of tough, because you can't really, unless you want to do like a little synopsis of every single story, it's kind of weird to do that, so you don't really do much of one, but we'll do a little bit of spoiler-free, and we'll give you a warning if we get spoilers. I will say, if you are enjoying the show, please do hit the like button if you're on YouTube. It helps us out a bunch if you do, and you can get some bonus shows with me and David, as well as some other bonuses from Mail Fuzz as a whole over in Patreon. I'll tell you more about that at the end of the episode, though. So, and also David does his homework movie at the end as well as a little bonus segment. So if you want to see which movie he went back and watched from the years on the ace that he wasn't on, we'll get to that at the end as well. So, yeah, Twilight Zone the movie. Why are we doing this? Well, a couple of reasons. One, I didn't want to see Borderlands. Two,
there are no other reasons.
No, there's another reason. There's actually a good reason why it's kind of fitting in around this time. It's because, well, actually a couple of reasons. First of all, we are been doing some 80s movies, some 80s sci-fi movies, because we want to do like a best of 80s list at the end of the year, and it's a blank spot on my list, and I don't think you'd seen it either, so it was a good reason to dive in for that. But an even better reason is that I've been reviewing the original Twilight Zone show on the TV channel for years at this point, and in fact, it may not line up precisely, but around the time of this going out, I will be finishing that up. Right? At the time of recording, I've got 4 episodes left of the original Twilight Zone, and I also just started for a Patreon sponsor tier, started doing the 80s Twilight Zone show. So I'm right at the crossroads in the TV shows, and of course, this movie came just before, a couple of years before the 80s Twilight Zone show. So this is the perfect time for us to do it on here, if you happen to have been following those reviews. If you haven't, doesn't matter. We're watching Twilight Zone the movie. It's standalone enough. It'll be fine. But if you've been watching the reviews I've been doing on YouTube, then this fits in roughly in a nice place.
This is the nice capper. This is, all right, we did every single one of them, and now we get to watch a few remakes of some of those episodes. Yeah.
Well, not all the stories are remakes, which I'll get into as we talk about them. But so it's an anthology movie with honestly some of the biggest directing names of the era. That said, some of them are kind of early in their career. Not all of them, but we got John Landis, we got Steven Spielberg, we have Joe Dante, and we got George Miller. We got a pretty big who's who of people in their prime, or arguably even still building up to their prime in some cases. So super interesting. I'd never seen this. I knew going in that it was one of the stories was going to be a remake of Nightmare at 30,000 Feet. And as I say that, I always forget the number of feet in that title, but I think it's
20,000.
Is it 20,000?
20,000.
I think there's an episode in the recent Twilight Zone that Jordan Peele did that had a similar title, and I think that one was like 30,000 feet.
Okay.
Which is where I'm getting that number from.
I'm seeing if it'll come up if I just type in 30,000 Twilight
David's
Zone.
hastily Googling
No,
here.
I think you're right. I think it is Nightmare at 30,000 feet.
Yeah, I knew it was a different number, and that's where I get mixed up. Which is not a remake of the story, by the way. It's set on a plane, but otherwise it's a completely different story. But they just wanted to...
I was going to say, that's cashing in pretty hard there.
Yeah, they wanted to hit the nostalgia of having the name be very similar. But so we'll get into it. But yeah, so I actually really like coming into this review that I have the perspective of having watched the entire original show. Well, barring 4 episodes at the time of recording, but luckily all the episodes that are remade in this movie have all happened already for me.
Can you imagine if they just picked like the last 4 episodes
I know.
to remake? And it's like, well,
I come in, I'm like, oh shit, I'm just as in the dark as David is. But no.
Yep.
I'm coming in with that perspective so I can compare a little bit. Whereas David, I'm assuming you haven't seen the original Twilight Zone, at least not much anyway.
Yeah, definitely not much. I remember that for a English class back when I was in like middle school or something. I forget even what like the segment, like what the curriculum was, but we watched an episode where there's like an alien invasion or something going on in the background, but then like all of the people are just turning on each other in this neighborhood. But like you don't actually like see the aliens, like they aren't really around.
It's a very famous episode called, I believe that's The Monsters of June Maple Street is the title of that one.
So that's one I definitely remember watching in its entirety, but anything else I just kind of, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, that's kind of just absorbed by cultural osmosis. Like I am aware of William Shatner's role in that.
Like there's a handful of episodes that are easily the handful of most famous episodes, and I'd say two of those stories are the ones that are remade in this episode. But I think Nightmare at 20,000 Feet is the one that is absolutely the biggest, and like somehow I knew about that story before I started watching Twilight Zone. I don't know where I knew about it from, but I knew about it. The phrase "there's something on the wing" is just something that I knew.
I was forgetting that this show I don't open with a quote from the movie, but I was 100% going to go with "there's something on the wing."
That's the Shatner version. You can't use that here.
I could use whatever I damn well please.
Actually, there's a fun bit on Third Rock from the Sun, which obviously John Lithgow starred in as sort of the lead of the ensemble, and William Shatner ended up guest starring on that show as like the alien who comes from like their home planet, who's like their boss. And when he arrives on Earth, they ask him, "Hey, how was the flight?" And Shatner says, "Well, it was great, except there was something on the wing." And he says it in that Shatner way. And then John Lithgow goes, "Hey, I had that too." So it's just a really on-the-nose thing that they were both in different versions of the same Twilight Zone story.
That's just a good writer's room. I like that.
They're just having fun. They know what they're doing. So, yeah, I mean, honestly, it's kind of tough to talk about them super in-depth before we get to spoilers, because it is an anthology. We have 4 stories, although technically 5. There's a little prologue story at the start that's a few minutes long, and then it gets into the rest of it. But let's just get to some blanket feelings, and then we'll dive in a bit deeper. David, how did you feel about Twilight Zone, the movie?
So I'm not really that experienced with anthology movies. I can't say I've really sat down and watched that many that are like, obviously in terms of like Screams After Midnight, you guys, every once in a while you come across an anthology film, and
we've done
it's a pretty normal thing.
We've done maybe like, I don't know, at least half a dozen, maybe even close to a dozen at this point. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it feels like it's much more common in like a horror sort of franchise. But no, I'm not really sure how I would feel if I were an audience member back in '83 sitting down and essentially just getting 4 episodes of a TV show. Because that's the thing. It's like once you take out the little prologue sequence and then any credits, it's about 90 minutes. So divide that over 4, you get about 22 minutes per section. Like it's a normal TV length episode for each one. And there's not really, a link between them, barring the fact that it's Twilight Zone. It's not like there's a connective thread moving between all of them. In terms of how I feel about it, I think that each of the episodes is done well. I think that it has the talent behind it. I don't think that there was any particular point where I thought like an actor was doing a poor job, or the direction just wasn't there, or the story was just blanket uninteresting. I think that there was always a competence behind each of the segments. That being said, I think that there is one segment that is the standout one that does the most with its concept. And then there's a standout segment that is just not belonging with the rest of these segments. I think that there was only one story that I would have said probably should have picked a different episode to do, because it just doesn't fit in with the rest of them as like a jive sort of thing. But it's not a bad, like none of them are bad. I think that the collection of such is not obviously like narratively fulfilling. It's not like you watch the whole thing and you think, wow, I really got this big thing out of it. Like, no, it's just 4 episodes of a TV show stitched together, more or less.
Yeah, but obviously made with bigger budgets and the talent and all the rest of it. It feels a bit more cinematic. Yeah, honestly, one of the surprising things for me was just how much I popped for when the Twilight Zone theme hits right at the end of the prologue sequence, and the camera goes up to the sky, and it's like dee 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 dee. I'm like, you know what? This feels kind of big, and I think this probably was for audiences in 1983. It was made for an audience who grew up watching the original show and we're going to pop hard for the references, for seeing some of the bigger stories done again. I think that's what it was made for, and I actually felt really weird thinking about that, because I'm like, damn, 1983, going back to the original show, for us today, that's like going back to like Tobey Maguire Spider-Man in terms of time, and that feels really weird, because that doesn't feel that long ago. But looking back to the 60s and the 80s, to me, the 60s and the 80s, they're aeons apart. They're two different, pop culture was so different between those two eras, but then you stop and think about it, and like, oh no, 20 years ago for us was 2004. Oh.
Yeah. I'm taking a look here. It would be as if someone came out with like The Sopranos, the movie.
Yes. No. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's kind of a weird thing. Honestly, anthology movies are very hit and miss for me, in the sense that even when you get a great segment in one, it doesn't necessarily mean that the whole movie's full of great segments. I think on Screams After Midnight, Tim tends to be a bit more into them and more positive. There's some that I like, and there's some that have great segments, but it's almost impossible. Even the ones that I kind of really like, there's always one story that I don't. There's always a dud in there that I don't like as the rest of them. And I think that what you were saying about it being narratively fulfilling, I always have that little bit of a problem where I'm like, it's not really a movie as so much as it's just a collection of short stories. And that's fine. Like, I know that going in, and I accept that, but it is definitely... Like, I don't know what you do to make a Twilight Zone movie feel more like a movie and less like a collection of shorts. And maybe you shouldn't, but that inherently makes me feel less like it's like a movie to me. And it's just kind of the way it is. And even anthologies that I like, many of which exist before this movie, the original Tales from the Crypt movie, for example, is from the 70s. Those Roger Corman movies that are anthologies from the 60s. This format already existed, and I think it harkens back to a time when people went to the movie theaters and you would get shorts before the movie. It was a normal thing to have like almost everything would be a double feature. You'd have like, this is almost like when you go to see a concert and there's like support bands. Like, it was just normal to get like
acts,
to get an opening movie, and then the main event movie would come after, and you'd pay your 50 cents to see everything. Right? Times were very different, but as a full movie package, it is a little bit weird to me, anthologies, in terms of like enjoying them. But but keep in mind though, that is me sharing my feelings on the anthology format as a whole, as opposed to nitpicking this movie for anything it does, because it doesn't do anything wrong with its anthology format.
Yeah, this definitely strikes me as more of a, especially with the fact that you get 4 big name directors in there, it feels more like a creative project rather than a commercial one.
It feels like a love letter that these 4 directors all wanted to like pay homage to the Twilight, because all these directors obviously grew up watching this damn thing. That is clear. It is so clear that they all have love for it, and they all wanted to do this. That's what this movie is, and in that realm, I think it's solid for what it is. I think the stories there is one in here that I don't like that much, and I also didn't really like the episode it's based on that much either. So I'll talk about that. But by and large, I do think the quality's pretty high. I think the original story's pretty good. I think the other ones that are remakes of the old episodes, I think one of them I don't think is as good as the original episode, but I do appreciate how sort of playful and inventive it is in a different way. It sort of fits the director's style a bit more. And then the other one, I think there's an argument that it's better than the original episode for a couple of reasons. But I'll as we go through them, I'll talk more in depth about each of these individually. So yeah, it was interesting to finally see this, and I think it's interesting in the context of like how this kind of was this love letter to the old show, and then I assume that the success of this or the interest in this is what ended up leading to a new Twilight Zone show in some capacity. So
I would assume so, but obviously it may have just been more of a testing ground to see if people were interested in the like idea of Twilight Zone rather than the movie actually doing well itself. Because as much as like it was $10 million budget, it made $42 million according to Wikipedia. It was successful, and that's a very reasonable thing to do. But obviously, the success of a movie and then the success of like a TV show based off of it are not necessarily linked.
Now, having started the 80s Twilight Zone, though, like the narrator feels similar here. We should probably mention the narrator in this is Burgess Meredith,
Yep.
Who of course I was like, what's this guy's voice? I recognize this voice. We've just been doing the Rocky movies over in Collector's Cut, so that was sticking out.
You step through a door and you're a bum.
Of course, he's here not because of Rocky. He's here because he was in like 4 episodes of the original Twilight Zone, one of them being one of the most famous episodes, which is Time Enough at Last.
Yeah, the prologue literally like name drops him. They're like, oh yeah, Burgess Meredith in that episode where he lost his glasses or whatever. And it's like, wow, all right.
Yeah.
Just calling that one out.
So, yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like, I think overall it's pretty good. I would say if you like Twilight Zone, you'll like it. But, you know, is it any more of a movie than just watching 4 episodes back to back are? Not really.
Yeah, I don't think you would have had the same experience. I think it was just, well, first off, I don't think you liked a lot of Disney stuff. But when I was growing up, Disney was doing this weird thing where they kept on trying to pitch like TV shows and stuff like that. And in doing so, they would make like the first 3 episodes or so. But then it wouldn't get picked up for whatever reason. But rather than let it go to waste, they just took the 3 episodes, sprinkled the weakest possible framing device over it, and then put it out as like a straight to DVD movie. And I think that's, even as a young child seeing those, I was always very acutely aware of this idea that it didn't feel fulfilling. It didn't feel like narratively that framing device was enough to keep it as like, this should have been its own thing. This was its own movie. This is an example of what I think is the right way to do it. And it's not that it's doing anything specially different, but it's coming at it as an anthology. It's coming at it as that is the reason they're making it, and they are structuring it in doing so. There's no like weak framing device where they just had to thread it together or whatever. It works as, like I said at the beginning, a creative vision. They had this idea they wanted to do, and they did it the way that they wanted to. It wasn't anything of, oh, you know, this is the first 4 episodes of our failed 80s pilot just stitched together. It's like, no, this is big names coming together and making an art project.
Yeah, it's one of this weird thing where I almost, like, I don't want to sound negative because I think it's very good by and large, and I think it's worth watching. It's just that as a movie, I don't find it that fulfilling. Right. Which is fair. You know. And
I mean, even what you were saying of you popped when the Twilight Zone theme started, and there's like a bunch of references and stuff. I was sitting there like, yeah, all right, it's the Twilight Zone theme. Like, I don't have that connection to it, so I think it even did a little bit less for me than it would have for you.
I think it's just this thing where they treat it like a big deal, where it feels like a big moment where it goes to the theme, and I can only imagine like seeing this in a theater with a crowd who grew up with the show, and it being kind of like a, oh shit, we're hearing this, and like, because even though obviously I'm watching the movie in the same TV that I've been watching the show on, you know, it's in widescreen. It's got 5.1 sound, which the show doesn't have. Like, there's just a little bit to it. I mean, this wouldn't have had 5.1 sound when it came out, admittedly, because it's still early 80s. But like the modern versions do have a 5.1 mix, and just hearing that sound kind of flood the room in a way that the TV show never does, it was just like, oh, it's bigger. It's got this oomph. It's got this kind of spectacle to it.
You know what I kind of wish they would have done, just to give it that extra little oomph to it, is have it be a shot-for-shot remake of the original opening, but also keep the 4:3 formatting and only break it out into the like widescreen format and like the last moments, like as the title comes up, just to show like bigger.
So what you're saying is you want what the Simpsons movie did.
Is that what they did? I haven't seen that in like 2 decades.
Yeah, they literally do the start of the opening, and then I think a character on a bike like goes across the screen and it opens it up into the wider aspect ratio as the title comes up.
Simpsons can have some good ideas too.
That's a good idea. Yeah. I think what's funny though is because by the time the Simpsons movie came out, 16:9 was normal for TV, so they went for wider for the movie. Whereas here it's 1.85 to 1, which is, you know, close enough to 16:9 that it's just basically just that when you're watching it on a TV these days. But you know, I'm so used to having the pillar boxes at the side of the screen for the 4:3. So yeah, it's interesting because it does feel a bit bigger, and it's literally up until maybe the 2000s Twilight Zone show, it's the only Twilight Zone that's not 4:3. You know, obviously the modern Jordan Peele one was whatever, but it's just interesting. Just like, oh, it feels a bit bigger. It feels a bit more cinematic.
That's fair.
bit grittier, maybe a bit harsher because it's a movie, so that they're not on network 60s TV. They can get away with a little bit more, even though they're not pushing past PG-13.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's a few, especially in the first segment, a few bits that I'm like, I wasn't aware of which ones were remakes and which ones weren't, but going into the first one, I was thinking, was this like allowed back then? Could they have done this episode back then?
I think there's definitely some episodes of the original Twilight Zone where you'll be maybe a little surprised how much they were pushing things. Like they were pushing as hard as they could for the time period. But what's interesting though, and this actually lends itself to one of the stories in this collection, is that sometimes them being forced to like not show things actually made some things a little creepier and eerier by like having to like dance around certain things. And there's one particular story here that I think I'll talk about, how interesting it is to see the differences in this movie versus the original episode.
Okay.
But yeah, so yeah, I mean, it's absolutely a worthwhile endeavor, and it's super interesting for anyone who likes Twilight Zone. And I think if you're with someone who's never seen Twilight Zone, it's a pretty good starter to say, hey, this is a feel for what Twilight Zone is, but then go back and enjoy the original show. I mean, ultimately, I don't think any movie, as good as it could have been, any collection of 3 or 4 stories was ever going to be better than saying, hey, just go watch the 160 episodes or whatever it is of the original show. Not that they're all great, there's some stinkers in there, but there's enough great episodes that absolutely it's a better, go and find a best of list and just go watch the top 20, top 30 episodes. Like, that's more of a worthwhile endeavor, but as a nice starter and as a nice kind of like throwback to it, where this was made with love and a bit of nostalgia. Like, I definitely feel that in this, and I think that framing in that prologue, which kind of presents it that way of like, hey, remember this old cool TV show and how scary it was? Like, that actually is kind of a cool, fun, like, it presents it how the filmmakers are looking back at it fondly, and then sets you on that journey. So
yeah, absolutely. And just for a little bit of trivia here, Steven Spielberg apparently basically got his start in Night Gallery, which obviously is one of those Twilight Zone tangential shows.
Well, I mean, it's what Rod Serling did, the creator of Twilight Zone. It's what he did after Twilight Zone. He went on to the Night Gallery.
Right, absolutely. So he obviously has a very strong connection to those sort of things back then, not even just from a viewing standpoint, but like he was a part of it. He made those. Yeah.
And if you go back to the original Twilight Zone, I mean, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, the director of the original episode was Richard Donner, who went on to do Superman and The Omen and Lethal Weapon and The Goonies. So even some directors were getting their starts back in that original show. And then, you look at this and it's like, oh, now George Miller's doing that story. Like, and that's what's so interesting about this to me as well, is that George Miller doing this is right in between Mad Max 2 and 3. Joe Dante's, this is a year before Gremlins. So he had even had his big hit. He'd done The Howling and a couple other things by this point. Spielberg was a year after E.T. here, so this was right when he was kind of becoming this megastar. I mean, obviously, Jaws was a huge hit. Close Encounters was pretty big. But I would say E.T.'s when he kind of cemented himself as like, okay, he's the director.
Right.
Of Hollywood. Yeah. He's the big mainstream director now. John Landis, a couple of years after American Werewolf in London. Out of all the names here, he's the one who I feel like his career went down after this. And,
yeah.
I don't think it's because of this, but obviously it's his segment that has the controversy behind it because of some deaths on set.
Yeah. I mean, should I just give quick details on that just so we can get it out of the way?
Yeah, what's funny is that I'd heard about this a long time ago and knew it was related to a helicopter, so I kept expecting to see a helicopter in the movie, and that's not actually, well, it's not there anyway. I was looking for it, it wasn't there.
Yeah, so without spoiling the segment itself, the segment is just about a guy who is a dick. He's just the worst. And they essentially at one point were trying to expand upon the character by giving him a little bit of redemption, just a tiny bit. And there's a little bit of like time travel and stuff in there. We'll get to it. But the thing is that he saw some children in trouble during like a Viet Cong sort of thing. And he was going to go out and rescue them and bring them to safety. And that was going to be a bit of redemption. But because it was Viet Cong, there was a bunch of helicopters flying around and explosions went haywire, ended up knocking out the helicopter and killed the actor Vic Morrow, who was the main character there, and then 2 kids as well. And the entire segment and all traces of the kids were just cut out of the movie because there was no way to like finish up that plot, and so we just got the version that we get in the movie that doesn't really have much redemption for them. But it's yeah, it's a deeply tragic thing, and there was a bunch of stuff in the background where essentially they were lucky to get this movie done at all, because I think I read that George Miller, once he heard about it, just basically left. Like, he didn't even stick around for most of the post-production. He was just so upset by it. And yeah, there's a whole big thing there.
Yeah, I actually don't think I knew that the actor in the story was one of the one of the victims, if that's the right word to use in this case. But it's interesting. I mean, especially since they seemingly had enough of the rest of the story to still have it work. It still works as it is in the movie. Yeah. I've heard people be very critical over the years about the safety precautions, and like if Landis himself is in some way responsible for how that set was run, and so and that we're talking about this, and this is just we just had like some new court case things come out about the whole Rust shooting incident, right, with Alec Baldwin and safety on sets and all that kind of thing. And that's obviously a very specific thing with why were real bullets even on set for this movie. But yeah, it's one of those things where I've not done much research into it. I didn't know too much about it. Obviously it's tragic whatever happened, and it has kind of been this cloud over this movie where I don't know if I've ever not watched it because of it, but it's definitely been the sort of thing where whenever I've seen the poster and it's been an option to watch, it's been kind of like, oh yeah, that's that movie where something went wrong and people died.
Yeah,
and it's kind of just like, maybe not today kind of thing.
Yeah, I went into the trivia as I usually do after these movies, just to throw out little things during the review. Every single piece of trivia was about the helicopter. Like, there was maybe 5 things that were not related to it at all.
Yeah, I wonder how well known this was to the general audience going to see the movie in 1983. Like, were the people going to see this? Did they know this had happened, or was it just this was back in the day where the internet didn't exist, so it hadn't spread to everyone quite the same way it would have? I mean,
it was still the 80s. You still had like a lot of news segments and stuff like that. I'm sure that once the movie hit theaters, that was going to bring up a bunch of people saying like, the movie that killed actor Vic Morrow is coming out in theaters. Like, that seems like the sort of thing that would be a big headline. Yeah,
so obviously we had to address it. We had to bring it up. I don't really have too much to say on it other than just it's maybe another stark example of, like, sometimes obviously stunts can go wrong. I think stunt people in particular do their job knowing that there's a level of risk, but this obviously went above and beyond that and actually hurt like lots of people. So
yes,
I think it's interesting to hear George Miller kind of walked away from the project once he found out, just because he's someone who by this point had done 2 Mad Max movies, and I do wonder if he's someone who especially makes movies with a lot of vehicles and a lot of stunts and kind of took that stuff very seriously. And maybe one of the reasons why he's so good at that sort of movie is because he did take all that stuff seriously. So maybe he felt a particular way about it because he's like, no, like there's a reason why we have certain precautions or whatever. Like maybe he had a very strong opinion because he had done movies with lots and lots of vehicles involved.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure he's spoken out about it. I didn't see anything directly about it, but yeah, no, it's crazy to me that I think that it's good that the movie did eventually come out so that it wasn't just, all in vain. It wasn't just like, okay, we're scrapping the entire thing, especially when apparently a lot of it had already been filmed. But it is also good for me that it doesn't feel like it's cashing in on that. It feels like it's very respectful and very like, look, we cut out that entire segment. We are being respectful in terms of how this went down. And it's not something that's just, come and see the movie that killed a bunch of people. It's like, all right, well, that would just be cheap.
Yeah, I'm just having a quick glance at some other things. Apparently the actors who died in the incident were kind of illegally hired in the sense that they were supposed to have supervision. They weren't supposed to be working at night or near anything dangerous. Apparently Spielberg was also disgusted with Landis and how he handled the situation. It ended their friendship. I'm just looking at the Wikipedia right now.
Yeah.
And apparently he called for the end of the new Hollywood era, which was where basically directors had more complete control over the films and called for more regulation. So yeah, it's kind of it's kind of nuts to hear some of this stuff. But yeah, that doesn't sound like the other directors involved were particularly happy with what happened with Landis' segment. That's interesting.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, we'll move on then. I mean, honestly, I think we're ready to just say spoilers at this point because I don't think you can really talk about the segments individually without just talking about them. So
yeah, that's fair. I will say, going into the movie, I saw the list of directors, but I didn't see what they were tied to. I didn't see which segments they did. I was trying to guess, like as we were moving through, which ones, like which director did which. I think I only got one. Like,
what's so funny to me about that is that on Wikipedia and I think IMDb as well. Let me just double check. I think they're literally just listed in the order of the story. No, actually not. In IMDb they're not. I tell a lie. IMDb has them in the wrong order. Never mind. But in Wikipedia they're in the right order. They're literally just in the order their stories are.
To be fair, I got it off of Wikipedia. I saw, it's got a little info box on the side and it shows directed by, and then it goes boom, 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 boom. I didn't realize they were in the order, so I assumed that they were like listed by some other thing. But yeah, I probably should have figured that one out.
To be fair, I think on IMDb they're listed by alphabetical for surname. I think that's how they've sorted them. But
okay,
not it really matters all that much. So yeah, spoilers for the Twilight Zone movie. You've been warned, everyone. So yeah, the movie has a little prologue scene, which has Dan Aykroyd in it, and he's the passenger in a car. I think he may have been hitchhiking. It's kind of implied that they don't know each other very well. But Albert Brooks is the driver, and they are driving. They're listening to music, but the tape, the old cassette tape, just to give you a bit of the error here, gets chewed up. And it's like, shit. Well, what do we do now? We need entertainment, damn it.
Oh God, we're gonna have to talk.
And they basically come up with the TV theme tune game where they're going to hum TV themes at each other. And I kind of felt young here actually because almost everyone they did I did not recognize. I'm like, I don't know any of these shows. I've heard of Bonanza, but I cannot tell you what it is.
They were throwing out like Bonanza, Perry Mason. I was like, dear Lord, you guys, let's go a little bit older. How about that?
But eventually, of course, they bring up Twilight Zone. I'm like, oh, okay, this is like a fourth wall breaking thing. All right, we're doing like a thing in the first story where it's like Twilight Zone existed. And they talk about how good it was. They mention a couple of episodes. Notably, they don't mention any of the episodes that are getting remade for the movie. But it's kind of a fun little thing. It's a little mood-setting moment.
I like how at one point Dan Aykroyd brings up an episode. I'm not sure what it is, but the other guy's just like, no, that's an Outer Limits episode. It's like, no, I'm pretty sure that's a Twilight Zone. I just like the little nod of like, yeah, there were a bunch of shows around that time all doing pretty much the same thing.
To the credit of Dan Aykroyd's character, I'm pretty sure I recognized the sound of this, which means it's probably Twilight Zone because I've not seen classic Outer Limits. So, but yeah, after they're having this conversation, though, Albert Brooks tries to scare him by like saying, "Let's play a little game of chicken where I turn off all the lights in the car and go as long as we can before one of us gets scared of getting hit or something." And Dan Aykroyd gets all scared, but the actual twist of it is Dan Aykroyd says, "Hey, I'll show you something scary," and makes him pull over the car. And then when he turns his head round, he's actually a demon or a monster or something.
Yeah, it's a big like face of makeup. It's a whole thing.
Yes.
The point that got me was as he lunges and attacks Albert Brooks's character, it makes like those stereotypical like wild cat noises, like the jaguar roars and stuff. And the face itself is not that scary. They don't play it as like a jump scare to that deep of an extent. But as soon as the wildcat noises started, I couldn't help but laugh. It was a little bit silly for me. I was just like, all right, that's a silly little opening, but moving on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the movie overall has a bit of a cheesiness, kind of like old school vibe to it, which I think they're going for, to be fair.
Yeah.
But this is when you get Burgess Meredith coming in and doing the intro of classic Twilight Zone with the music playing behind it. Yeah, it's well done. It's pushing the mood, sets you up for the movie. And we end up getting into the first of the stories, which don't have titles, actually, which is funny because the rest of them, because they're remakes of episodes, you can just give them names, because this is Kick the Can, this is It's a Good Life, this is Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. But the first one, because it's not a remake of an episode, it's just segment number 1. That's how it's titled.
On IMDb, I believe it's called Time Out, is the name that they gave it. but it is just segment number one in anything in the movie.
Yeah, no, there's definitely some episodes you can kind of compare it to and say, oh, they're kind of taking a little bit of this one or a little bit of that one, but it's definitely original. It's definitely its own thing. So the setting of this one is there's a man, the lead character, who is basically just a piece of shit. He's a bigot. Yeah.
This look, I'm sitting there. I'm enjoying my morning. I'm watching this movie. And then all of a sudden, this character comes in and he starts dropping hard slurs. And I'm like, wow, I didn't realize I was going to feel so uncomfortable so quickly.
Oh, yeah. This guy just, he basically didn't get a promotion. A Jewish man got it instead. So he just starts going all in. And somehow that just leads to him going in every group he doesn't like and every group he thinks is a problem in America. Honestly, it was scary just how not dated this felt.
Yeah. This is, as soon as I saw this scene, I was like, well, clearly this man's going to get his comeuppance. And all I could think is, we really should be showing this segment to like modern audiences, and maybe we could get some like mild improvements in society from it.
Yeah, to be fair, there was an actor in here I recognize. Steve Williams is the black man who like says something to him. Yeah, that's Steve Williams, who I've been recently seeing on X-Files episodes because I've been reviewing that over on the TV channel. But he's one of those actors that's popped up in a bunch of stuff. But yeah, so yeah, the whole setup here is that he is complaining about Jewish people, he's complaining about black people, and he's complaining about Asian people. And he's not even consistent. There's actually the moment that caught me like off guard, or I caught him in like a sort of, not a lie, but in like just like how thin his like argument was for why he dislikes all of these people and how he's better because he's American. Even though all Americans, well, not all, but most Americans are immigrants or come from immigrant families.
Yeah.
He mentions at one point that his bank is owned by Japanese, right? But later on, he says that he was in the Korean War, right, fighting people. And then he says those same people now own his bank. And I'm like, wait a minute. You said your bank was owned by Japanese. You were in the Korean... Like, you've flat out said two pieces of information that contradict each... I get that to him, Asian people are all the same. I'm just,
Look,
it's
no
there.
one has ever accused racists of being coherent in their ideals.
I'm just saying, like, anyone could poke holes in his argument based on his own information.
I love how he's also talking to his friends, and they're not like egging him on. They're not like trying to get him to get like more racist, but they're also not doing anything to calm him down to start until other people speak up. But there's one point where he's like, oh yeah, and like all those Jewish people, they have all this money. Why does he need a promotion? And the other guy knows about his coworker who got the promotion. He's like, that guy's not rich. That guy doesn't have
I know
any
him.
money. Like, he's not rich at all. Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah. So even though his friends are clearly not great people because they're just sort of sitting laughing as he says all this, they're just sort of enjoying the show, as it were. Like, even them, like, eventually there's just a bit of factual information that they're like, no, that's not right. Like, that's not true. So, yeah, I mean, because when the guy steps in and says, hey, look, if you want to be a bigot, whatever, but we don't want to have to sit and listen to it. And, throughout the whole scene, there's, like, different people around the bar who are sort of turning and being like, are you hearing this guy? That's, it's making everyone awkward and uncomfortable. And his friends try and say, hey, look, he's had a bit of bad news today. Like, yeah, he's been a dick, sure, but like, let us try and deal with it. And eventually, like, he just keeps on rambling. He keeps reiterating things, and he storms out of the bar. So he has this big exit, and it's kind of awkward when he leaves, and everyone just sort of calms back down. But when he walks out of the bar, he's all of a sudden in Nazi Germany, right? He steps out of the bar.
It's apparently actually Nazi-occupied France, but very minor. Yeah.
Fair enough. But same idea. And immediately you get this idea, okay, he's going to be basically living through what the people he's been bigoted about, he's going to live through some of the horrors that they've had to face to maybe gain some empathy, right? There's a couple of things that it's kind of doing here in terms of like bringing back some ideas from old episodes of Twilight Zone. The idea of like a character just sort of walking somewhere or walking through a door and being in a different time or a different place, that came up a lot in Twilight Zone.
Twilight Zone.
Yeah, pretty much. And then also the idea of like spending a day in like someone else's shoes to gain like empathy and sympathy for them and understand what their plight is and how wrong you were. That's also a thing in Twilight Zone over several episodes. So I felt like they were taking those two broader ideas and kind of, you know, doing their own take on it here with this, which I think works actually. I think it's fun. I think immediately him like sort of encountering these two Nazis on the street and like not speaking a word of German, and they're just sort of looking at his ID and being like, "What is this? California?" You know.
I mean, they don't say a word of English. It's all in German. But yeah, they are basically, they even like try different languages. Like they try French and stuff like that to see if he's speaking English. And he just stands there like, what are you what's going on? And they clearly are asking for his papers. They pull out his wallet and they pull out his MasterCard and they're like, what the heck is this? What's going on here?
Was ist das?
And they eventually get him down to like, you know, Englander or American. And as soon as he hears American, he's like, yeah, I'm American. What about it? And then immediately they start like trying to tackle him down and shoot him.
Oh, yes, apologies to anyone who speaks German, by the way, as I'm butchering the accent and the language here. Yep. But yeah, so this becomes a bit of a sort of chase where they're chasing him through the streets and he's ducking and diving into alleyways and trying to hide. And I was assuming that this story was going to lead him to like be sheltered by a Jewish person, like a Jewish person would understand his plight and shelter him. Right. But that's not where it goes. Where it actually goes instead is that he runs into the apartment of, I assume, a French family then, since it's Nazi-occupied France. And instead of like sheltering them, like the woman's just so scared, clearly scared because the Nazis have been so harsh on everyone around, that she just yells out the window for them to come and get him. So he ends up climbing out onto like the ledge of this apartment building and sort of like trying to just get away from the Nazis. In fact, there's actually a really funny moment here where one of the Nazis like tries to like come out of the window and just falls to his death, which I thought was quite funny, to be honest.
I don't know what it adds. I thought for sure they were gonna like use that as justification of like, look, he killed one of our officers. We can like fully let loose on him. But like, nah, he just
they don't need justification.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, whatever, we're gonna shoot him anyway.
Actually, so the two Nazi officers down in the street basically just start taking shots, and I actually couldn't decide if they were having fun toying with them and intentionally missing, or if they were actually trying to hit him and just sort of laughing with each other. Ah, you fool, I'm a better shot than you are. No, I'm better than you are. And then they just both keep missing for ages.
Yeah, this is one of the few times where I feel like everything else in the movie, obviously it makes sense that we don't understand what they're saying. It plays into more of the idea of this alienation, this foreign world that he's shown up in. But I, just for my own personal curiosity, I really want to know what they were saying here as they were taking shots. And like you said, they were missing constantly. I wanted to know whether or not like it was intentional that they were toying with him or if they were actually just bad shots.
But ultimately he falls down and sort of lands on his back on the ground. But this is when it transitions. You see, we're going to go into a different time period so that he experiences the plights of everyone he's been, you know, racist against in some way. Yeah. So when he wakes up, he looks up and sees the KKK looking down at him, and they keep saying that he's black. Well, that's not the word they use, obviously. They're throwing slurs around, but they're going to hang him, and he's like saying, "You're crazy. You're all crazy. What are you doing? I did nothing wrong." So he has to go through the experience of being chased by the Klan and running away from them. So, and don't get me wrong, these other two are definitely shorter, although obviously because of the accident and the tragedy, the Viet Cong part is especially short. Yeah. That one's just him. Once he transitions to that, after he hides in the water and he comes back up and he's now in a river. And well, I mean, I assumed it was Korea because that's the war he said he was in, but
according to Wikipedia, it's Vietnam. I
mean, it does look very Vietnam, like in terms of how they present it, with him, you know, with the soldiers going through the water and the American military there. Basically all this is that he's hiding. He has a bit of a scare with a snake in the water, and then he sees some American soldiers and says, "Hey, I'm American." But then, of course, just like the previous trip where he was getting hunted by the KKK, the Americans don't see an American. They see, you know, Viet Cong or whatever. So
yeah, they see the enemy.
So they fire at him, and then he wakes back up in Nazi Germany or occupied France, and the end of the story is that he's put into a train with Jewish people who all look down at him. They slap a star on him, you know, to identify him as Jewish, and they put him in the train, and he's sort of begging and saying no, 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 and he sees all these people looking very sad, I actually really like the ending though, because the very final moment is him sort of like having his arms out, because it's one of those old trains where it's the sort of the wooden
Yeah,
boards,
the
and
slats.
he's reaching out of the slats of the train, and he can actually see his friends at the bar. He can see the bar in the present day where he came from, and his friends are looking for him. Obviously, they've followed him outside, wondering where he went, and he's just begging, "Please, it's me. I'm here. Please." And that's the end of the story. It's an
Mhm.
awful human being who is given, like, because they could have done like the ending where he comes back to present day and he's not so shitty, like he's learned something. But no,
Right.
they give you the Tales from the Crypt style here, where no, he just gets his comeuppance and he's now destined to live this life.
Yeah, that's the thing. Without knowing anything about Twilight Zone, without knowing that this was a semi-original story within its own right, I feel like this one did the best at setting the tone of what I imagine Twilight Zone episodes to be. Not having watched them, having only this like cultural osmosis of the idea of what it is, it always strikes me as like, yes, maybe occasionally you can have a happy-ish ending, but at best it's only ever going to be bittersweet, and usually it is just whoever is the dick gets their comeuppance, and like nobody makes it out in a happy ending. Everything is just sucky. So I like that this movie is kind of the quintessential Twilight Zone in terms of the way that I think about it as an outsider. It's playing, as you said, the two big tropes of stepping out into this foreign world, someplace you're unfamiliar with, and then also doing the spending a day in someone else's shoes. It feels like it just hits all the major points of what a stereotypical Twilight Zone episode would be right out the gate.
Yeah. Although I will say Twilight Zone didn't necessarily typically end in a negative way. Like often characters would learn something and would be fine. Like I think Tales from the Crypt was much more consistent with no, someone's getting comeuppance at the end, and that's what
Yeah.
the end of the story always is. Twilight Zone was a lot more varied in how it ended its stories with its characters.
Right. I'm just thinking in terms of the episodes that again hit those massive popularities. I'm thinking of like the episode with the aliens in the neighborhood. That does not have a happy ending. I'm thinking the episode where I think it's Twilight Zone, it might have been Outer Limits, but Beauty Skin Deep one. Uh where it's, a woman gets surgery or whatever to look beautiful.
Okay. I don't think that's what the title of the episode is though. I don't know what you're talking about though.
Yeah, I can't remember what the name is. And then obviously 20,000 Feet's its own thing as well. None of those end
In fact,
happily. None of those are positive endings.
Eye of the Beholder, I believe.
Eye of
is
the Beholder,
title of
that's
that
it.
episode.
It's the other saying about beauty. Got it.
So yeah, I thought this first story was good. I enjoyed the different settings. I enjoyed him being chased, particularly in the France segment of the story. I thought was really strong. I thought it was a nice bit of tension. Obviously it was quite clear what it was doing immediately. It was like, okay, I get it. He's going to have to go through and suffer what all these different groups of people in the past have suffered to maybe understand. Because all he does is just blanketly say, "Oh no, they're all worse than me because I'm a white American." That's like basically his entire stance. So
Yeah.
it's simple in its message, but it's effective, and sadly, it feels just as relevant. But it was particularly when he started saying, "No, but I'm American." That was when I
Yeah.
started. That feels like it's really especially still relevant because there's so many people who would just say, "I'm better because I'm this."
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, that's it sucks that the reason I felt so uncomfortable watching this is not because it felt like it was a bygone era of something where we've learned to be
No.
better. It's I feel like I still see this. I still
Yep.
feel like this is getting rallies out in the Midwest of America, and I hate it.
Yep. Now, the next story, which is the Spielberg directed segment, is called Kick the Can. And I remember actually when we got to this episode on the TV show, and I was kind of lukewarm on it. I didn't really like it that much. It wasn't my type of story, and it was very different to a lot of Twilight Zone episodes. And I found out, and I'd forgotten this until I got to the movie, but I remember finding out at the time, oh, this is one of the stories that's remade in the movie. And I remember my reaction being, really? Why? Why this one? And I still kind of feel that. Obviously, it does expand upon it, and that's true of all of these to an extent, is that there's definitely stuff in this version that wasn't in the episode, right? They definitely... I don't remember a character in the TV version of this story that was there that did it, right? Because this story has like this, man who's got magic abilities or whatever who does it to them, right?
Right.
He's the one who actually makes the plot happen. I don't remember the TV show having that. Much like a lot of Twilight Zone episodes, I remember the TV show just happens. It just magically happens because it's Twilight Zone. Here, there's a character who clearly is the one doing it to the other characters, who makes them young again. Because the plot of this is that we're in an old folks' home, and they all start reminiscing about what it was like to be young, and they want to, dance again, they want to play again, they want to do various things. But there's the one curmudgeon, the one old man who's like, no, I like being old. Stop living in the past. We're old. Deal with it, right? Be miserable. That's what we're supposed to be. But of course, that night, they go out to play, and when they play kick the can, which, by the way, I realized watching this that I have no idea what the rules to kick the can are.
It seems like it's hide and seek, but if you have to like come back, and while the person is seeking for other people, you have to come back and kick a can, and if you do that, then you like the hiders win, and the seeker has to be seeker again.
Okay, that seems right based on what we see in the movie, but I'm like, this is an old game that I had never played as a kid.
Absolutely. They had him say, like, everyone's just like, oh, what do you miss most about being a kid? And they say like, oh, I like all the jumping around and doing all this. And then he's like, I really enjoyed kick the can. And I was like, immediately in my head, all I picture is a kid walking down a street kicking a can, and that's it. That's all the fun that was had. It's like stick ball, where you just hit a ball with a stick.
So of course this man, though, the man who's doing all this and like gives them this experience, Mr. Bloom, you may recognize him because he's famously in The Shining, right? He's the guy in The Shining who has The Shining.
Exact same character.
He kind of is. He actually is very similar in a lot of ways. So that actor's name is Scatman Crothers.
Famous musician as well. Yep.
I mean, Scatman sounds like a musician's name, doesn't it? Yeah. It does.
I mean, that's his stage name. Yeah, his actual name is
that makes
Benjamin
sense.
Crothers. Yeah,
he wasn't born Scatman Crothers. Okay.
Can you imagine that hospital trip? What would you like to name your newborn baby? Scatman.
Oh dear. Yeah. So anyway, I think for me, this story is super sentimental, right? This is Spielberg going full like childhood wonder and sentimentality, and like, oh, they all enjoy being kids, but then they all realize that no, we're old. Like, I don't want to lose all these experiences, because once they all turn into kids, right? They literally turn into children, and they like it for like 10 minutes, but then they all start thinking about like how their lives have changed. And one of the lines actually bugged me. One of the girls / old women, depending on how you're looking at it, she says something like, "Oh, I don't want to live through all the people I've lost again." And I thought, they've not come back. Like, you're not having to relive that. I mean, I get what you're saying if you're saying, oh, I'm going to make new relationships and connections and lose all those people again. Sure. But the way she phrased it was kind of weird, like as if she's going to lose the same people again. And I'm like, nah, that's not going to happen. He's not magically brought all your dead loved ones back to life.
Yeah. Look, as I said in the beginning, I think there's one segment in this movie that really stands out as not belonging with the rest of the tone of the others, and this is it.
Yep.
I think that, I don't know what, you say that this was an episode of Twilight Zone. I'm sure it was, but it just doesn't feel like it fits here in terms of this is a childlike wonder sort of thing. There is a little bit of a careful what you wish for sort of message, but strangely enough, it's not for the old people who get turned into kids. It's for the old man who just says that we should be old, deal with it. Because he sees the fact that these other people have like regained their youth and whatever, and he's like, take me with you, please, I want to go. And like, he's not allowed to for whatever reason. But beyond that, everything else, that's practically a post note on the end. It's just a childlike wonder, and then realizing, oh, it's fun temporarily, but not something we want to do permanently, so we'd like to go back to normal. And
but they keep their youthful minds, though. They're all much happier and upbeat afterwards. Because, like, hey, we don't have to be old and depressed just because we're old. We can still enjoy life. Like, which is fine. Like, I don't have a problem with that sentiment. It's just, it's super sentimental, though. Like, it's super saccharine. It's super, just, I don't know. I wasn't a big fan of the episode in the show. And this movie version does take it further, where there's this literal magical character who even turns to the camera at the end of the story and says, don't worry, he'll understand, or something to that effect. It's just super on the nose. So I wasn't that into it. And I think the TV episode, well, it wasn't my favorite of the show either. It at least kept a little bit of mystique about it, where It was more, if I remember correctly, it was more a reveal at the end where he realized that the other people had turned into kids,
Yeah,
rather
that's
than how it plays out here.
that's the thing about this one is it didn't feel like there was any sort of twist. It didn't feel like there was any sort of, oh, look at that, this crazy thing that happened. Like from the beginning of it, you get the idea that this is the magical black man trope where he shows up and like improves these people's lives and then moves on to the next one. And so there's no point in this where it's like, oh no, I can't believe that this actually happened instead. There's nothing that catches you off guard throughout the entire segment.
Yeah, and to be fair, like I think it's kind of a misconception that Twilight Zone always had a twist, because I think a lot of the best episodes don't have twists.
Okay.
You know, time enough.
I'm going to come into this with all the misconceptions. I know, can correct me on all of them. But
that's the thing. I people commented on some of the reviews we did of the newer Twilight Zone, the 2021 version. And I remembered saying that one of my big problems with that show in the early few episodes is that it felt like every episode had to have like 5 twists. Like they had to just keep doing it. It just got to a point where it was silly and nothing had any meaning anymore. And I remember people commenting saying, oh, but Twilight Zone has to have a twist. And I'm like, but they don't know. Like some of the most famous episodes don't really have twists. Time Enough at Last doesn't really have a twist. If people are going to say that, oh, the glasses breaking or a twist, that's not a twist. That's just an ironic ending. There's a difference.
That's fair. I would also say that this segment also doesn't have an ironic ending. I would say it doesn't have
No, it doesn't.
anything to it.
I'm not arguing that this has anything like that. I'm saying that they don't have to have a twist to be a good Twilight Zone story. Which is not a defense of this necessarily, because I don't necessarily like it that much. But
right.
But you know, it's just
it's not that this isn't a Twilight Zone-esque story. It's just that it's not a very interesting story, flat out.
Yes, I think that's fair to say. Because it just ends with was it Mr. Bloom? He goes to a new old folks home where they're all sad looking. And it's like, oh, he's going to cheer them up. He's going to bring them joy and happiness.
Yep. There is one interesting point that I kind of wish they would have played on a little bit further of just like the consequences of it. And that is the one of the older guys who I guess really was into like pirate stuff or whatever. He just stays a kid. He's like, nah, screw that. I don't care about it. I enjoyed my childhood more than I enjoy adulthood. I'm just going to stay.
They weren't forced to go back, right? Most of them wanted to, and it turns out he didn't want to go back to being an old man. So he just stays a kid and leaves. And it's like, okay. Because I remember the original episode, from what I remember as well, when they turn into kids towards the end, there's this sort of feeling that the main character, the grumpy old man, has been left behind and now he regrets it. And it worked because it felt like it was more symbolic. It was more like, they're still happy because they still have a youthful spirit and they can go back to, like that mindset. And he can, and now he feels left out and left behind because he's not given himself into it, right? He's kept himself alienated, and now it's too late to join them. Whereas here it's kind of murky because they come back to being old people, but except the one guy who's a kid now says, no, you can't come with me. But now he's like, no, please take me with you. I want to be young like you now. It's like, sorry, you can't. Like now we're.
Yeah, I feel like it would have been a little bit more of a point if instead of the kid saying it, it was the old man who caused it saying it, Mr. Bloom. Yeah. If he was just like, sorry, man, but like it's got to come from within. It's not something like I can't just make it happen like that. I think it could have made more of a point, but having it be the kid just basically saying like, no, bye, and just flying away, like that's it. It didn't come off with the same sort of punchiness to it.
I think it murkies the message. I think because they go a bit further with it, it actually murkies the message of the original episode. Now, I wasn't in love with the original episode, but I do think it felt like it had more of a point by the end. Whereas here, it feels like they convolute it a bit too much for me.
Yeah. I will say I did have a fun time during the brief period with the kid actors because all of them are still, except for the one guy who's going full pirate or whatever, all of them are still acting old.
Yes.
Like all of them, they got like a nasally voice, just like, oh, Carol, you look like an 8-year-old. What's going on here? My favorite is there's the old Jewish actor who is, of course, made younger, and his wife is picked up by like the pirate kid. Like he just like lifts up the young girl, and he just turns around just like, hey, get away from my wife. And I don't know, something about that delivery just tickled me. I loved it.
Yeah, I mean, the story starts with them watching a video, or no, it was like a presentation where this doctor's saying, "Hey, sex is a very important part of most of your life, and there's no reason to still not enjoy it well into your 80s." And it cuts to the reactions, and like one of the old women just like gets this little smile, like, "Oh yeah, I'm ready." Yeah,
I guess one other thing we should mention is the development of the character of the old curmudgeon. He apparently every like 2 weeks his family visits, and he packs up his bag because he wants to go back home with his
yes,
family. He wants to go visit them, and every single time they make an excuse and say like, no, not this week, can't have you. So he has to go back upstairs and unpack his bag, and it gives that sort of backstory as to why he is as angry at the world and like just
yeah,
resigned to his fate more than the others.
yeah. It's almost like he's being punished for having this little bit of hope that's misplaced that keeps getting he keeps getting let down in this way, and it explains why he is the way he is.
Yeah.
I think ultimately though, like, I think even just looking at the old show though, the whimsical, happier episodes were just never my favorites. Like it never just fit for me as well as some of the other stuff did. So it was always going to be an uphill battle. So part of this is personal taste, but yeah, I mean you didn't like it either, so it's not just me at the very least.
I think I would have been fine with it if it were just an episode of a show, like you're saying. It might not have been the greatest thing, but I don't think it fit here with the other three and the tones they were setting and the more, I don't want to say horror, but the more uneasy setting you get from them.
Yeah.
This one just stood out like a sore thumb.
Yeah. So the next story, again a remake of a classic episode, called It's a Good Life. Now, this is the one that's very interesting for me to talk about, because this is directed by Joe Dante. In fact, regular Joe Dante collaborator Dick Miller has a cameo at the start. He plays the chef or the cook in the diner. Nice to see him.
You know, I got when I was saying I was predicting the directors, I got Spielberg right. But now that you're pointing out Dick Miller is in there, I should have got this was Dante.
You should have got this was Dante.
Yeah.
It even had what's his face from Inner Space, from the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers, is like the uncle character.
Oh yeah, that's right.
So that was another hint that it was Joe Dante.
Yep.
Although this was before Inner Space, so this might have been where he met him and decided. Oh no, actually, was he in Howling as well? He might have been. Now I'm thinking about it. Oh well, doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'll check real quick. What year was Howling? Nope, there it is. Yep, 1981. He was in Howling.
Yep. Okay. Yep. Something was clicking there. But anyway, so the premise of this story, and it's actually one of the more sinister episodes of the show, which is that this family are basically tiptoeing around this young child character, and the reveal over the course of the episode, it's less of a twist and more of a sort of gradual kind of like revelation as to what it is that this kid has a superpower. He can basically make reality change to his will. He can make things appear or disappear, and that includes people. So this family are living in fear of him and his wrath. Now, the original show, this is probably one of the creepiest episodes of the whole thing, because so much of it's implied, and the way they all live in terror is so effective that it comes across as this really, really hardcore horror story in a lot of ways. Not in a visual sense, but just in a pure, like, oh, this is just like pure dread. Like they are living in constant fear, and they have to appease him and not piss him off and give him whatever he wants. And it's such an effective episode. And I think the episode is better than this story because of that feeling. However, I think this is a very interesting comparison, because this story in the movie, Joe Dante takes it in a different direction, where Joe Dante is like, I'm going to be creative. I'm going to do Joe Dante things. I'm going to have like cartoons come to life. I'm going to do these wacky animatronic things, and it's super fun, but it doesn't have that pure horror of the original story. You get hints of it. You can see where that premise had that in here. There's even like one part where it shows like, oh, this is like his old sister who he's like made her mouth shut, like the Matrix, like the mouth just sort of skinned over, and like that's super creepy. But then it's so much more kind of playful and hijinksy with the rest of the story. So I don't like this as much as the original, but it is very interesting and fun in its own way, and it feels like Joe Dante is like, no, I'm just going to do a Joe Dante version of this. I'm going to do the most Joe Dante thing I can think of.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, obviously not knowing the original as well, that is another one of those ones that kind of crept into the periphery of my knowledge of. I remember there being a kid that could basically just reality warp, but I didn't know it was this segment going into it. But But no, I think that it views it from an interesting lens of also just the times and how they've changed. Because obviously, back when the original Twilight Zone came out, you know, TVs weren't as common. You didn't have these sort of like violent cartoons going on. I like how they reimagined the character not as this, and this is based based solely off of your description of it, of what I'm understanding. It's not this sort of grim, scary character. It's a character who is just basically just living as a kid in the 80s. He's just having fun, doing whatever he wants. And the issue here is that there's absolutely no one who can say, no, don't do that. There's no control over this. So it's essentially what happens when you give a kid the keys to everything. What will he do with it? And you get this sort of, you know, burgers for every meal and ice cream there. Well, everything is like a cartoon.
With peanut butter in them.
Yes, which is the worst.
Psychotic.
I can't even imagine that.
Psychotic. I love burgers, I love peanut butter, but I cannot put those two things together. Nope. Yeah, because they even have this character sort of, this whole start of the story's different, right? Again, it's been a while since I watched the episode, but there definitely wasn't this start with this, you know, him meeting someone at a diner and bringing her home. Like, I don't remember that being a thing in the episode. And the fact that this character, this woman, is a teacher, and the idea at the ending of the story being she actually talks him down and says, you can't do this anymore, but I'll stay with you. Because one of the kid's problems here is that he says that everyone always wants to leave him, and that makes him feel sad, and it's why he acts out. So this actually has more of like a sort of like happy ending where he might actually learn right from wrong from her at the end. That's kind of what it leaves off on, is that, oh no, she's going to become a mother figure, and she's going to teach him, and she's going to whatever. But you can see the seeds of what was originally a very creepy story, because at one point he says, you know, it's revealed that this isn't his real family. Like, he basically imprisoned this family after he already got rid of his own, because he can make people disappear. He can do horrible things to them.
It's implied that the girl with her mouth sealed over is his actual sister.
Yes.
Like, that he is just like crippled and left stuck in front of the TV. But then the new sister, the one that's been brought in here, it tells the teacher character of like, or maybe he'll do to you what he did to his real family. And you just see the kid just like, shut up, sis. Like, like, we're not even going to talk about how messed up that was.
Yeah, like I enjoyed this for how like playful it was, and like especially when you get to this idea that like he makes the uncle do like a magic show, and then he has like this demonic animatronic bunny come out of the hat, like a horror show, like a cartoon.
Yeah.
And then later on he makes what I think is just meant to be the Tasmanian devil comes out of the TV.
Because that's the thing, this is a WB movie. I was expecting them to just say like, yeah, we got the rights to it, and he likes cartoons, so this is Taz. But then once it stopped spinning, it was just its own little mutant creation.
I feel like they were going for this thing where it's like, it is meant to be the Tasmanian devil, but it's just so like monstrous to see what it actually looks like the cartoon brought to life. But I mean, you could go either way on it. But
yeah,
interestingly, Joe Dante went on to do a movie called Looney Tunes Back in Action, which I've not actually seen yet, believe it or not, but that came out in the 2000s. So he does have an affinity for those characters. So
yeah, absolutely. Just another thing I liked in this, during that opening sequence, two things. One, we see the whole reason that she gets wrapped up in this is because she very quickly tries to peel out of the parking lot. She backs her car up and hits the bike that Anthony is on, the kid. I don't know why. I got an actual like belly laugh out of that, of just seeing this woman hit this kid with her car. It was just a little comedic beat of just seeing this kid flop down on the ground. She's just like, oh my God, oh geez.
Yeah, it is implied later, though, that he probably did this intentionally. Like, he's luring her into his trap kind of thing.
Yes. And then the other thing is, as she is driving him back home, they arrive at the house, and it's this beautiful, like, pristine house. And you actually see the very next, like, shot inside leads to a cartoon, and you see it's the exact same house in the cartoon, which gives you that inkling of something's wrong, something's very wrong here. But outside the house, there are like a good dozen just broken down cars, like just left scattered about here. And you immediately get the vibe of, oh, this has happened before. People have been like, you don't know what happens to people on the inside, but people have been brought to this house before.
Yeah, it does a good job of setting up. And I think that was something that might have been in the original show as well, is like the remnants of other people who had come and gone. But and also there's a cameo from Billy Mumy, who played the kid in the original episode.
Oh, okay.
Right. I didn't actually catch who he was. I'm assuming he was one of the guys in the diner at the start, but I could be wrong. But
I mean, it would, yeah, there's a guy who like bullies the kid and like unplugs his arcade machine. It would kind of make sense that it would be him.
But I like the idea that he picks her. He wants her to be his new like family member because she helps him after this guy's mean to him. So it's like, okay, that was your worst mistake, lady. You've become liked by this demonic kid who has all these powers. But like I say though, by the time he gets to the end of the story and she's kind of talking him down, he says he just sent them wherever they wanted to go. And that she's like, hey, I promise, like, I'll stick by you, but you have to, like, not use your powers. Don't do this, don't do that. And I'll teach you right from wrong. Because obviously, when they bring out this dinner, that's like a burger with peanut butter, ice cream, and, like, cookies and whatever else, she's like, you guys, like, eat like this every night. Like, you know, you're a growing boy. You need some, you know, nutrition of some kind. So, yeah.
Well, that's what I love, the little turn of the character there, is that she's like, well, you need some nutrition every once in a while. And the parents and all the other people are like, what? No, this is perfect. This is great. This is awesome food. Everyone's happy with this. And he's like, no, you're right. I do need nutrition. And the parents are like, yeah, no, we've always said that's what you need. You need nutrition. That's totally
Do you know what's so
like
funny about this, though? Is that it mirrors a scene almost identically to this last season of The Boys, when Homelander gets annoyed that everyone's agreeing with them too much. And I'm like, yeah, this is what Homelander is that he's a boy who has too much power. And then gets frustrated that everyone just is scared of him and agrees with him all the time.
I do like the concept that in the end we have Helen, the teacher character, essentially realizing this kid needs some level of discipline. Like, it's not a matter that, oh, you know, we can't make him angry. If we make him angry, then we're going to be like killed, essentially. We're going to be banished to a hellscape. It's more so the idea of, he wants to be loved, he doesn't want to be feared, and he does just need essentially a parent to show him how to properly do this. I will say, though, the sequence where she says that she wants to be that for him, where she said, like, he teleports away the whole house, they're left in like a realm of nothingness, and she's just like, well, hey, let us out of here and I'll guide you, I'll try to teach you, whatever. It sounds almost menacing, the way that she's saying it. I got this vibe that like she was going to use his powers for like their joint benefit of like, you know, going to Atlantic City and just winning the slots or something like that. Like, it sounded almost menacing in a way.
Yeah. Almost like she was trying to trick him, maybe even into like lowering his guard so she could strike. But no, she actually takes him with her, and that's how the story pretty much ends. I mean, I think the idea of like having him be obsessed with cartoons and then that being the hint, because he keeps saying anything can happen in a cartoon, but then he can also make literally anything happen. Like that thematic throughput is I think is fun. Like I said, I feel like Joe Dante has fun with this. He has like creative lighting at some points where it's all purple and green. Like, it just feels like it's a very creative, bombastic, very animated, pardon the pun, version of this story, whereas the original episode, by contrast, was a lot more, I wouldn't even say it's just suggested, because it did make it explicitly clear what he can do by the end, but you don't see much of it happening. You don't see a lot of visual effects. It's much more just about the idea of it, and it's much scarier because of that. So I think I prefer that, like I said, but this does feel like Joe Dante just being Joe Dante and doing these more wacky versions of it. There's a moment where parts of the house feel like they're more strange, like, you know, like some of the hallways feel like a bit more symmetrical, or like they're almost animated of themselves.
Yeah, he brings her upstairs to like wash her hands before dinner, and you see that he's watching a black and white cartoon, like a really old one, and that entire hallway that they're in is all black and white.
Yeah.
Like, and you see within the cartoon, this is the thing that happens throughout the segment, and I think it's genius the way he works this in, is he sees the cartoon has like a very long hallway with a bunch of doors closing behind it. And so as they leave the upstairs area, you see behind them, there's this hallway that has a visual trick going on that makes it look entirely endless. Like, it just stretches on forever. So it's throughout this, they keep on showing a cartoon in the background, and then whatever the cartoon is doing influences immediately what is going on in the real world.
Yeah, one of my favorite beats in the story, actually, and I think this was kind of in the original episode, it's been a while, but it's the idea that the family write like a note to the person who might be leaving saying, help us, he's crazy or he's powerful.
He's a monster.
Yeah. Like, and obviously that leads to him like putting the fake sister into the cartoon, which is its own little fun like sequence. But that idea of like them trying to pass out a secret message for help because they're being held captive by a child who's got superpowers is really fun. Like I really like that.
Yeah,
it's a good time.
Nah, out of all the segments, I think that this one, it is technically the longest segment. It comes in at like just about 27 minutes, whereas it's basically picking up the slack for the first segment of how that one was shorter. I think that this one does the most with its concept. I think it fully explores the idea of you have this kid, he's obsessed with cartoons, and he has godlike abilities. What happens next? And it just fully dives into that idea, and I think gives you like a full story from it. I think that this is the most fleshed out of all of them.
Yeah. I think, honestly, though, being a fan of the original episode, the ending did feel a bit, oh, this is a weird change. Like, to give it this happy, almost ending of it, like, maybe it'll work out now.
Was there, like, the nothing realm in the original as well?
I don't think so.
Because it felt like that's where it diverted.
Yeah, I don't remember a visual like that in the original episode.
Okay.
But anyway, the final story is Nightmare at 20,000 Feet. And this immediately starts with John Lithgow in the bathroom on the plane, just freaking out. He's scared of flying. He he is like the original episode, which wasn't too long ago for me because it's actually a season 5 episode. Believe it or not, it's very late in the run.
Oh, okay.
Shatner immediately in that does look visibly stressed, like he's sweating a little bit. But John Lithgow here, he is like, it's like he's in like a, I don't know, like a David Lynch movie or something in this bathroom, like looking into the mirror and like everything's skewing and twisting and whatnot. Like they go heavy with this, like how extremely uncomfortable and paranoid he is already.
I love he's locked in the bathroom and then all of a sudden there's this huge pounding at the door and he's freaking out about it. And then you see the outside, it's just like a light tap. Like, excuse me, sir. Need to get back to your seat.
Yeah, so this one, in a lot of ways, is the closest to the original story. There are still some changes, though. For example, in the original story, there's literally just a hatch next to the seat that can be opened. And like Shatner just opens it. I'm like, yeah, that feels like a poor design choice.
I mean, planes do have an emergency exit door, but usually it's not the itchy, tense people who are allowed to sit there anymore.
Yes, precisely. So this is actually the one that I think is arguably better than the original story, right? I think you can compare and like go blow for blow in a lot of the other elements, like Lithgow versus Shatner, how it handles certain moments, how it handles the characters around him reacting to his freaking out and whatnot, the logic of how the story progresses. I think the big thing, though, this story has in comparison to the original, because the one negative when I watched the original episode was how shit the monster looked, right? It was just a furry suit. It was like a guy in a furry suit, and it looked awful. It was a great episode. It's one of the best episodes of the show, absolutely, because of how it tells the story and this idea of there been something on the wing and no one else seeing it. All that stuff is great, but the suit looks terrible. Here, here we get a genuinely great looking, at times animatronic, like demonic beast. It's like it's just got that thing where all the hair looks like sort of slicked back and it's always in the rain and the thunder and all the rest of it, and it's definitely obscured as much as possible, so you just get this vague sense of its shape. It feels a lot more cinematic in how it's presented, and as it should, because we're doing a movie here as opposed to, a low-budget TV episode. But it does feel like night and day in terms of just how much better this thing looks on the wing whenever you get a glimpse of it.
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of performances, I think that this section has the best. I think Lithgow just nails it. And then there's not a lot of supporting cast in this one. It is mostly focused on Lithgow, but there is like a young girl who's just kind of bouncing around the plane as well. There's some flight attendants.
She's got some attitude on her, this girl.
Yes, she does. But it's not one of those child performances that comes off as like, okay, you're trying a bit too hard, honey. Like, nah, she strikes me as like, this is just how she is, and it works.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously the premise here, for anyone who doesn't know it, is that John Lithgow's character is scared of flying, and he sees something on the wing, and no one else does. But he starts freaking out. Everyone tries to calm him down. No one else can see it. And in this version, and I think this is more so than the original version, is there's a good moment here where everyone tries to look. Like there's like a whole crowd of people going up to the windows and seeing if they can see anything. But he keeps freaking out. They offer him a sedative. He says, no, I'll be fine. He tries to calm down. And he's a man of logic. He's written a book about computers. And because this is 1983, the flight attendant like thinks it's like a science fiction book. She's like, oh, computer chips, you're a science fiction fan. Like, no, it's about computers. It's I wrote it, in fact.
It's up in the cockpit of a plane. It's right there. I did that.
But I love the visual of the monster when you first see it out in the wing. The idea that it's messing with the engine, but we find out later when one of the pilots comes to talk to him to try and calm him down, and he mentions the engine. He's like, that engine's out, right? The captain reluctantly, or one of the pilots reluctantly has to say, as a matter of fact, 9 minutes ago it was struck by lightning and it is out. And it's like, oh, that's your little seed of like, maybe he's onto something. Maybe he is seeing something out there because the engine is out. Suspicious.
This is one of those ones of ambiguity. It's one of those ones where, again, if I'm thinking of what I think of as standard Twilight Zone plots, it's that idea of paranoia and ambiguity of, is this thing actually happening? Is this something that is just in the mind? And it just keeps on getting worse and worse and worse over the course of the segment as to like how bad it gets.
If anything, and I felt this way about the original episode though, is they maybe actually go a little too far at the end to say that it probably did happen because of the damage on the wing.
That was going to be my question. I was wondering how ambiguous it was at the end of the original episode, because this one pretty much outright says like, nah, he's right. Like, Gremlin.
I think it did. Yeah, because it's very similar. You know, he's being wheeled away in a stretcher and he's talking about the thing in the wing or whatever. And there is like a moment where something gives them all pause to go, oh, wait, something did happen up there. It wasn't just as clear cut. Don't get me wrong. Right. Obviously, he still looks like a crazy man because he breaks open the window with like this oxygen tank that one of the passengers has, and it grabs the gun from the
flight marshal.
The flight marshal, grabs his gun from his holster, which they do sort of tease really nicely. I actually think this is one of the things that's better in the original episode. Actually, is that there's a whole bit where you can see he wants the gun. And you can see the gun on the flight marshal, and there's like a whole thing where he's going to try and get it, and they really milk the tension out of that. Here, they don't quite do that. Here, they just have the marshals kind of try to pin him down, and as that's happening, he just sort of goes for it and grabs his gun. But he shoots the window, and then sticks his head out the window and tries to shoot the demon, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, and that's in the original?
I mean, it doesn't look the exact same, but he definitely gets a gun. He definitely has his head stuck out the window at one point.
Because that's
sure.
It's just the way you were phrasing that. Like, sticks his head out the window, yes, but also the plane decompresses, and it looks like he's just sucked out the window. It seems like the only thing keeping him in is the flight marshal holding him in by his legs. Yeah,
well, keep in mind, like I said, it was more of like a hatch that was opened in the original. It wasn't like a broken window.
Gotcha.
But yeah, don't get me wrong. I remember watching it and thinking, okay, I'm not sure how probable it is he wouldn't just either die or whatever. I mean, here they do explain, though, they are starting to land when this is happening. So they are kind of...
That's the bit that got me, was that as the co-pilot's talking him down, it's basically just like, look, yes, we lost an engine. Like, it's okay. We've only got 20 minutes until we land. I'm like, oh, that's nothing.
Yeah.
Like, that's nothing. You'd be perfectly fine. Like, no, even if the next engine went out, unless like the entire wing is lost, they could easily just coast their way down. No problem.
Yeah, but I think all the visuals of the monster are great, and there's a great jump scare moment because he's got the shutter down, the blind, and then he lifts it up, and it's like right there in his face, and that is a moment from the show as well. That like
it builds it up so well because it's him trying to sleep, and the camera just slowly pushes in on his face, and you just know he's gonna turn around and open that shutter up.
It's like I say, I feel like they changed the least for this one because they knew it was a winner already. Like there wasn't too much to change. If anything, they ramped it up a little bit. They obviously made the visuals better. The performance is different. Admittedly, obviously, to do a true comparison, I'd have to go back and watch the episode again and sort of compare them side by side. And I'd have to do that for all of them if I really wanted to compare them. But this one does feel the closest in a lot of ways and doesn't feel like they altered too much beyond just like, I don't remember there being a little girl who was kind of sassy in the original story. But like, that's all just a bit of extra flavor. Obviously, the only real thing that sticks out as being additional is the little bit at the end where they, the original episode ended with him just getting into the ambulance or whatever. Here we get this extra little scene where he's in the ambulance, he's talking about what happened, and the little twist to bookend the movie is that Dan Aykroyd's the ambulance driver, and sort of leans back in and says, "Oh, what happened?" It's like, "Oh yeah, I kind of saved the day. I was a hero almost." It's like, "Oh, really? You had some trouble up in the sky? Eh? Do you want to see something really scary?" And then, but at the end, they play Rod Serling's voiceover from the original show for the intro. So
I did notice the difference there.
Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute, that's not Meredith.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously they have Meredith come in at the start of each story to do a little bit of narration, and that's pretty much it. But
yeah, it's not even because it's not the thing. There's a opening narration and a closing narration on the segments on the TV show.
Yeah, well, each episode's only one segment in the classic show. The original show only had
but
one
I'm saying
story.
there's an opening and a closing narration, right? Yeah. This one only has the openings. We don't get any sort of closing wrap up from him.
Which is actually a lot like the 80s TV show, because the 80s TV show has been really inconsistent. Because the 80s TV show would have either 2 or 3 segments per episode, and I've only watched 4 so far, but it's very inconsistent as to when the narrator comes in. Sometimes he'll come in at the start of the second story, sometimes they won't. He'll only come in at the end of the second story. It's very hit and miss, and there's kind of picking and choosing when they go. Here it's always the start. The narrator always comes in at the start of each of the main stories. Not the prologue, but each of the main stories.
Yeah, right.
So
yeah, no, I mean, for 20,000 Feet, I think that in terms of style, in terms of like how much fun it seems like they're having, I'd still give that one to Joe Dante. But just in terms of sheer like competence and how it feels super tense the entire time, this one is far and away, I think, the like strongest entry.
Yeah, I think honestly, surprisingly, I really like the Landis one, even though it has all the baggage. I actually think it's a really solid Twilight Zone story.
Yeah, I'd agree.
I'd probably put Nightmare at 20,000 Feet above that one, though. I think Joe Dante's, I could go above or below the Landis one. Like, I really like the Joe Dante playfulness. The only hindrance for it is how much I like the creepiness of the original episode and how I feel like it sort of diminishes that here by going for more fun instead. I think the thing though I know for sure is that I would put the Spielberg one dead last. I just don't like it that much.
I definitely think that 20,000's first and Spielberg's last. I think for me, I would probably put, I think the Dante one is the like more theatrical experience. It feels like the stronger like movie entry. But if we're talking about how much I think it just feels like Twilight Zone, of what I think of as Twilight Zone, I'd give that to the Landis one. So I think I'd probably put Dante above Landis, but it's so tight. It's like it could be flipped just by my mood.
Yeah, so like I always feel weird talking about anthologies when I'm reviewing them, because I feel like they're obviously all shorter, right? It's all these short stories, so it's hard to like have I feel like I'm recounting a lot more of what each story is, as opposed to actually digging into like what each story is kind of doing or saying. And I think, like Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, like obviously it's a story about paranoia. It's about a story about no one believing this man and what he's seeing, but it might actually be real. But and maybe that murkies up the potential meaning of like, oh, this is just like a visualization of his fears, like the worst that he's imagining come to life, kind of thing. But it's a fun movie. I think as we get towards kind of like our ending segments here, like rating it's going to be kind of interesting. Obviously, I think picking a favorite scene in an MVP maybe a little bit easier, just because you can still pick a scene individually from any of the stories. I mean, do you have a pick for scene of the movie?
It's gonna sound weird because obviously the way we define best scene is just one that like stands out the best, and I don't think it's the best scene in the movie, but I think the one that stands out to me is the segment where, in the third segment, where the kid takes the woman upstairs, and we see like this entire hallway is all black and white, and then we cut to the sister sitting in front of the TV, and we don't see her mouth until it pans up and then shows it's sealed off Matrix style. I think that out of the whole movie, that one gave me simultaneously the best sort of unsettling scare to it, and then also combine that with the idea of showing the black and white hallway with the black and white cartoons immediately gives me a better idea as to what this kid's powers is. It's like very, just in a single shot, it's more informative than any line of dialogue could be, and I think it's really great in that sort of way.
Yeah, I think I feel kind of lazy doing this, but I feel like just the first time you see the monster in the wing of the plane,
Yeah.
it's so good. And I think because I came into it with this preconceived notion of like how good the original story is, except that one asterisk of the monster looking like shit and kind of lame. This just was such a glow up of like, this is so much better visually for this one element that it sticks out so much.
Yeah. I will say, just forgot to mention, a good thing and a bad thing about that segment for me. Good thing is that when he opens up the shutter for like the jump scare moment of the face is right there at the window, there's like 5 frames, like blink and you'll miss it, where they show his face, John Lithgow's face, and his eyes are like bulging out of his head, cartoon style. It's such a tiny little thing, but it really sells just like the frantic nature of that. But then on the negative side of it, again, I don't know how much they're pulling from the original, but having the gremlin at the end of it basically just like give a wink and a wave and then fly away off into the sky just felt really overly cartoony to me.
Yeah, it kind of felt like very mischievous
Yeah.
at the end. I didn't mean that so much, but yeah, I see what you're saying. Because definitely, even in the original episode, it felt mischievous just purely because of the fact that it kept intentionally hiding whenever it wasn't just him looking. So it was like, oh, I want everyone to think you're a complete nut job. I'm going to hide. All right, what about your MVP of the movie?
I mean, if we're talking strongest performance, it's far and away Lithgow. He's
Like,
got the
for these questions, it's always for any reason. It can be strongest performance. It can be, maybe just a character you like the most. It can be for whatever.
I mean, I'm discounting everybody from Spielberg's story. No one's standing out there. As much as I do like the general premise and vibe from Joe Dante's story, and the actors were competent, I don't think any of them really stand out as going above and beyond. Even the kid actor didn't quite deliver as well as I would have liked there. And then the first story, Vic Morrow does a fantastic job, but ultimately his character just doesn't have a lot going on. He's just a dick who is put through the ringer. So all in all, it's just by process of elimination, it's got to go to Lithgow. He really knocks it out of the park with his absolute paranoia and fear. And it just seems like obviously he was acting, but it doesn't feel like he was. It feels like he just actually was scared out of his mind.
Yeah. Also, shout out to the opening prologue scene, because obviously it gets glossed over a bit. I actually think it's a really fun intro to the movie.
It feels very unscripted. It feels like Landis basically went in and said, like, here's the basic beats you need to hit, and then talk about Twilight Zone, and then say, hey, you want to see something scary. But beyond that, they were allowed to do whatever they wanted.
Yeah, I think I've got to go with Lithgow as well. It's boring to just pick the same thing, but honestly, it sticks out the most. When you've been Lithgowed. That's all I'll say.
Yep.
All right, what are you rating Twilight Zone the movie?
God, this is so hard. Like, I know I say that all the time. You hit me with the ratings, and I'm like, I don't know. But like this one, especially, is a hard one. I would say, in terms of like coming at it as a creative project, I think everyone really brought maybe not their absolute A game. It's not, it's not the best thing George Miller's ever made. It's not the best thing Joe Dante's ever made. It's definitely not the best thing Spielberg's ever made. But I think that it does still have this charm to it where it feels like this is something that everybody was happy to have been there and they had fun with it as much as they could, obviously, with the stuff that went on.
Yeah, I was going to say they were happy to be there until a certain point, and then maybe weren't so happy to be attached to it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all in all, I think it is a very well-made film. It's just strange that it's a film at all. I feel like this... I would have been fine with it in terms of if I watched each of these segments individually and just said, oh, it's 4 short films, and I would have thought they were all great. But strung together as a movie, it does... I don't want to say it detracts, but it doesn't add anything to it. It doesn't make it better by being all the parts together. So I'm going to say this is probably going to come out to be I'm gonna go 7.5. It's not great. It can't hit that 8 level for me, but it is still a solid thing. I don't think there's any reason not to watch it. I think that it's perfectly watchable movie, and it's for anybody who has any interest in Twilight Zone. I think you were right up top where it's a good entry point. You get the best hits, you get this done in a very theatrical, bigger style, and it's a good launching point to get into the original or 80s series as much as anything else.
Yeah, I think I always struggle with anthologies for pacing because I always feel like whenever you just end the story and start a new one, I always feel a little bit like, oh, this is a good place to pause it and come back to it later. Just because
Yeah.
inherently it's not one story that's flowing and crescendoing in the way that I expect the movie to. And I think that's just maybe just a personal thing why I never really have anthologies at the top of the of my list ever. I think this is a really solid one. I think several of the stories are very good. I think it's a nice love letter to Twilight Zone. I think some of the theatrical moments with Joe Dante's like prosthetics and his story, or the monster and the nightmare story, all very good stuff. I think it's a really nice vibe. I think it's easy to recommend to people who like Twilight Zone or want to try Twilight Zone. As a movie as a whole, I agree that I can't quite hit the great territory just because one, Spielberg story kind of brings it down a little bit, but also just because I do come into it with a little bit of baggage because I've seen previous versions of several of these stories, and it feels a bit weird to just be getting remakes of them as opposed to just original new stories that they could have done instead.
Yeah. Honestly, that's kind of what I was hoping out of this movie, is get some stuff that feels Twilight Zone-ish, maybe takes the premise of original episodes, but then does its own completely original plot off of them, rather than just remaking directly.
Yeah, so I think it's good. I'm going to go with a 7. I think it's a good movie. I think it's definitely a different experience than most regular movies, though, and I would maybe just put an asterisk on it and say that. But then again, if you love anthology movies and you already feel that way, everything I've said about anthologies is not going to phase you in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
So, nothing to worry about there. But yeah, it's interesting because I do think that just a 90-minute movie that feels like a Twilight Zone story, but it's big enough to be a movie would be more interesting. But there's an argument to say, why does this have to be a movie? Like, why? I feel like today you could just get some big directors in to do big episodes, and arguably even the 80s show did that. Wes Craven did some episodes, like it's possible. No reason why not.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, again, it feels like it was kind of just, as much as it was a creative project, it does feel like it was kind of a testing ground as well, where they were like, look, we want to do a new TV show, but we don't know if we can make that last, so we're just going to see how people react to it here. And also, by putting out the movie first, they kind of seed that interest of people who would want to see more of Twilight Zone come out, but don't have access to the original 60s show because it's the 80s.
Yeah, I mean, I actually don't know if there's any real connection from there's the producers on this that are involved in the TV show that there's a link to it, or is it just sort of like, oh, the movie came out and that sparked enough interest that people then had the idea of doing a new TV show?
Right.
I don't know, but hey ho. That is our thoughts on the Twilight Zone movie, but you can give us your thoughts in the comments and all that. Next time on the Atomic Cinema Experiment, we have got a brand new release. We will be heading out to the theaters. It'll be out this weekend when you get this episode, but we're away to see Alien Romulus. So hopefully that's good.
God, I hope it's good.
I really hope it's good. I want a good Alien movie. I really do. But of course, as I said earlier, you can get bonus content over at Patreon, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Me and David do 2 monthly bonus shows on there. We get the Criterion Cut, which is where we review movies from the Criterion Collection, and we do movies on extra reels, which are some of the worst movies of all time. If that sounds like fun, then go check it out. You can support all the content and help keep all the podcasts coming, both on here, over on the TV channel, the Screams After Midnight Horror Movie podcast. All of it gets supported over on that Patreon. So please do go and give it a look-see if you want to. But before we wrap up and go, though, David is a homework movie. So, David, what sci-fi movie did you go back and watch from earlier on in the annals of the Atomic Cinema Experiment?
Well, I'm trying to keep general theming the same, and I was curious if you guys had ever done an anthology movie that I could also just watch simultaneously. I couldn't find one. That's not to say you didn't, but I couldn't easily find one.
I don't think we did. I'm thinking.
Okay.
I don't remember an anthology on Ace before.
All right, fair enough. So then what I did was I was like, okay, movies like the Twilight Zone movie. I like to see what the internet has to say. And they didn't give me a whole lot to work with there. But they did suggest, well, if you like Twilight Zone, you would like Black Mirror. And I was like, all right, fair enough. Black Mirror is kind of that modern day version for a while there. And then I said, all right, movies like Black Mirror. And the first one that came up, and I can't say I don't understand why, but I'm surprised it was first, was the movie Oxygen from 2021.
Okay.
It's a movie full of twists. Just constantly, like, you go 10 minutes, here's the twist. That's just the best way I could describe it. For anybody who isn't aware, it was a Netflix movie. It was a French film. The general core concept of it is that there is a woman who wakes up in a cryogenic pod. She has no memory of like who she is, but she can't escape this pod. And of course, she is running low on oxygen. So all in all, I saw Buried with Ryan Reynolds, and that was all I could think of. I saw that, and that movie, maybe I need to revisit it. It has been like a good decade since I saw it, but like that movie left me with such a like heart-pounding tension to it, where like it set up such a good feel of claustrophobia. I was so afraid of what was going to happen. This movie doesn't quite hit that same level of tension or claustrophobia. It feels a little bit more open, especially as we get further out into the movie. But I do like the sci-fi twist that it makes. I like how it adds on different things of she's able to talk to an AI who's able to get like all this information for her, and like it, because it's a cryopod, it's like a medical stuff as well. So she's got different like tubes in her and shots and stuff like that. It's got interesting things that keep it separate from Buried. But ultimately, I think the problem I came down to is that every single time it pulled one of its twists, it felt like, and this is what we're doing now. It didn't feel like this is the natural consequence of what we did earlier. It felt like, and now this random thing is going to happen. And we just keep doing that every 10 minutes for 90 minutes long. And it didn't quite feel like a flowing narrative, to the point where one of the final things that happens in the movie is that the character makes a sudden realization. And I feel like that realization should be made like 20 minutes in. Like, sure, she's panicking. Sure, there's a lot of stuff going on, but like, it shouldn't have been the final reveal of the movie. It shouldn't have been the big final thing. So ultimately, I was a bit disappointed with that one. Acting wise, it was fine. The visual effects, they kept it limited to like one single place. So that was also fine. I would say this is probably, I'd say like a 5.5 for me, just barely above that middle mark, because I was honestly in and out of giving it like my full attention. It was having trouble keeping me interested the whole time, which shouldn't be a thing for something as tense as you're trapped and you can't escape.
Yeah, I broadly remember this one, but it's mostly faded in my memory. So
that's fair. I mean, it was
bad.
you did it as a new release on a Netflix movie, and we've all learned the dangers of that. Cough, cough, Atlas.
Yes, I remember. I'm going to assume I gave it like a 6.
You gave it a 6. So did Tara as well.
Sounds right.
So time was not kind to it in my eyes, at least.
Oh well, there you go. That's the show, everyone. That's been the Atomic Cinema Experiment. Thank you very much for joining us. We do appreciate it. Keep watching science fiction and computer ad salsa.